You don't even have a high school diploma, do you? I don't need papers from an uneducated person. I was working at a beverage company, rushing around teaching my staff every day, but still living a pretty good life. The thing is, my team and I were always racking our brains dealing with our department head, Bob. Bob was the type to judge people by their appearance or the highest education they had obtained. Once he found out I hadn't even attended high school, he always gave me a hard time. Then one day, Bob orders me to put together some materials for a business meeting. I tried to say no, but when he started threatening fines, I had no choice but to do it. On the day of the meeting, I handed in the papers I'd poured my heart and soul into, but Bob just laughed and threw them back at me, saying anything made by someone without a high school diploma was trash. All right, I get it. Holding back my anger, I put the papers I made through the shredder. An hour later, when the meeting started, Bob came back looking like he'd seen a ghost. I'm Kevin, 42 years old. I work in the general affairs department of a beverage company. I live with my wife and kid, and I just got promoted to manager this year. Our income has gone up and we've got a bit more breathing room in the budget, but the kid's growing up and we have to think about paying for college down the line. To do that, I need to climb even higher up the corporate ladder, but there's a big old roadblock standing in my way. The general affairs department handles all sorts of stuff, managing facilities, taking care of each department's setup, running company events, you name it. And now that I'm a manager, I've got the important job of training up the staff too. These young employees are the future of our company. They're really valuable. Training them up is a big responsibility, but it's rewarding too. Last year, we had this training on harassment, and they told us we have to be really careful how we talk to people, even if you don't mean anything by it. Sometimes what you say can come off as intimidating. Us middle-aged folks are scratching our heads trying to figure out this generation gap, but we have to make sure we don't scare off the young ones. It's really tough to guide them without being too lenient, but not too harsh either. I'm always on edge, worrying that even a little correction might get me accused of harassment. Still, I like seeing my staff grow and improve. There's nothing that compares to the joy of seeing them succeed. In the middle of all this, there's this guy who doesn't give a hoot about company rules and just does things his own way. His name's Bob, and he's the head of the general affairs department. Bob's always full of himself, known for sticking to his own rules no matter what. Good morning, Mr. Bob. As soon as Bob walks in, I greet him right away. He just raises his hand a bit to acknowledge me and heads to his desk without a word. Morning, everyone. Once Bob sits down, he slowly runs his finger over the surface of his desk. It didn't seem like that meant anything special, but the next second, he calls me over sharp-like. Hey, Kevin. Oh, yes, sir. How may I help you? I hurry over to him. Bob shows me his fingertip that he'd just run across the desk, and there's clear disappointment on his face. It's dusty. Didn't you make sure your staff cleaned properly? I'm sorry, I did tell them to. In the general affairs department, we had this rule that we had to clean Bob's desk every morning. It was something he decided himself, and we had to follow it. He says it's to boost employees' loyalty to the company. Cleaning isn't a bad thing, but the staff isn't happy because they have to come in early and get checked on really close. This week, the person in charge of cleaning was someone who normally reports to the office just on time and had no time for cleaning, so I secretly allowed him to do the cleaning tasks after hours. I'd asked him to clean after Bob went home, but it seems it didn't work out well. I don't want to hear excuses. This happens because of your poor supervision. You are too lax. That's why your staff is slacking off. Bob continued in a harsh tone. I sighed internally, but kept my expression neutral as I replied. I'm very sorry. Bob lowered his voice, as if to drive the point home, and said, as punishment, you'll clean everyone's desk for a month. Any mistake our department is responsible for is the supervisor's fault. I was stunned but had no choice but to silently obey the order. To cover for my subordinate's mistake, I now had to come in early every morning and clean all the desks. Understood. Inwardly, I was seething with anger and humiliation, but resisting here wouldn't change anything. He never admits his own faults and pushes all the responsibility onto his subordinates. Even so, I decided to endure it to watch over my staff's growth and protect them. For our future, now is the time for patience. The employee who was supposed to be blamed showed his remorse to me. I'm so sorry. It's my fault. I'll take the punishment instead. Feeling their sincerity in those words, I quietly shook my head. It's all right. It's my fault for going against the department head's rules. Though I was shocked inside, I maintained a dignified appearance in front of my staff. As a manager, I didn't want to show them a pitiful sight. Bob had a habit of calling me out whenever something displeased him and yelling at me in front of the employees. The reasons were usually mistakes by subordinates or Bob's bad mood. If you don't shape up, I'm the one who gets scolded. Yes, I'm very sorry. Even knowing it was unreasonable scolding, all I could do was say sorry and listen to his cursing until he was satisfied. Apologizing while feeling the painful stares of my coworkers left a scar on my heart every time. Following up with subordinates and receiving Bob's lectures every day. Since becoming a manager, the stress between superiors and subordinates has been increasing. After Bob's scolding ended and I returned to my desk, I remembered the old days. I'd heard that the higher you rise, the heavier the responsibility becomes, but I miss the days when I was young and only had to worry about myself. Back then, I was still a rank-and-file employee, working frantically and getting scolded by my seniors daily. Only now do I understand that my seniors weren't scolding me because they enjoyed it. It was all loving guidance expecting my growth. Even if I can't be exactly like them, I encouraged myself to do my best so my subordinates could grow quickly. Little by little, my subordinates are growing. When they do their jobs well, I truly feel happy. Bob was transferred to the General Affairs Department after being promoted to department head, but his first impression was very arrogant. When he came to our department, he immediately started showing his tyrannical attitude. I'm the top dog here. Be prepared to get demoted if you're incompetent. I remember we were all surprised and dumbfounded by these words. Since then, Bob has been establishing his own selfish rules one after another and making us follow them. On top of the morning cleaning task, he implemented rules like absolute obedience to the department head's orders, with a $20,000 fine for noncompliance. He imposed unreasonable punishments like 100 push-ups for saying no, things you wouldn't even see in a football team. The employees naturally resented this, but breaking the rules would negatively affect performance evaluations, and they were afraid of being seen as rebellious against superiors and getting lower performance reviews, so they reluctantly complied. Before him, Bob's time, this office was a peaceful workplace without any unreasonable rules. The employees grumbled. The employees grumble. He likes to flaunt his power by using his position as department head. One day, when Bob called me in, it was just for a morning meeting. As the employees watched, he suddenly raised his voice. "Kevin, your department's performance is dropping. What are you doing?" I immediately bowed my head. "I'm very sorry. I'll come up with a plan right away." I could have explained the reason right then, but just apologizing was the best way to calm Bob's anger. After his scolding ended, I returned to my desk and quietly took a deep breath. It's painful to be humiliated in front of my subordinates, but enduring it for their sake is my duty. We must overcome this humiliation for us to grow and for the company to prosper. My subordinates were worried about me. Their words of encouragement were my support. "Manager, we always appreciate your support. We'll do our best too." "Thanks. It's because of you all that I can keep going." Not just rules, but Bob had many prejudices and often voiced them daily. One day, as I was returning from a client meeting with Bob, "That client earlier was quite a beauty, wasn't she? I hear she's so talented. She's even considered a future executive candidate." I answered seriously, but inwardly I felt uncomfortable with Bob's words. During the meeting, Bob kept staring at the beautiful employee's face with a leering expression. His gaze was so obvious that I tried to keep the conversation going while hoping the client wouldn't be offended, but my relief at finishing successfully was short-lived. No matter how talented she is, I'm sure she's just a slut. She knows she's beautiful, so finding partners is no trouble for her. He looked at me with obvious ulterior motives, seeking agreement. Feeling disgusted by his words, I carefully chose my words to caution him. "They're an important client. So could you please refrain from such comments? I said calmly, but Bob wouldn't listen. No way, that hot girl is definitely playing around. Maybe I have a chance too. At that moment, for the first time, I looked at Bob with contempt for his prejudice based solely on someone's appearance. Bob also judged people based on their education and hometown. One day in the company cafeteria, as we were having lunch, Bob spotted a young employee. "Did you know that guy's a graduate of the College of Engineering?" Bob sat next to me and said while looking at the young employee, "Is there something wrong with that?" I frowned. Engineering departments are full of nerds who love tinkering with robots and machines, right? It's pretty much a given that quiet guys wearing glasses are like that. Bob judged people solely on their education and appearance, laughing mockingly. That would be bad enough, but he says it directly to the person, which is extremely malicious. "Hey, you're a nerd, aren't you? Tell me about your favorite Japanese anime." The young employee, suddenly accosted, was clearly uncomfortable, so I stepped in to help. "Come on, Mr. Bob. It's hard to answer when you ask something like that out of the blue. What's the big deal? I'm just trying to communicate with my subordinates." Bob made excuses, but his subordinates probably find him intimidating. Many employees avoided him. Bob, who evaluated people only by their appearance and education, was unpopular not just in the General Affairs Department but throughout the company. Everyone shrank in his presence, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. However, no one had the courage to complain directly to him, so all the complaints came to me. "Manager Kevin, please do something about Mr. Bob's behavior." They ask me this, but there's nothing I can do. I couldn't act because if I went against the rules Bob set for the General Affairs Department, I'd receive severe punishment. Seeing how powerless I was, some employees said, "What an unreliable manager." They sneered like that. Those words stung deeply. It was an incredibly pitiful feeling, especially since I was already aware of it myself. Every day I thought about how I could at least say one word of rebuttal to Bob. However, if I stood up to Bob and my evaluation dropped, I might get transferred. If that happened, the subordinates I had carefully trained would be re-educated by Bob, and all my efforts would be wasted. To protect my subordinates, I can't leave the General Affairs Department. This is my mission as a manager. I kept telling myself this, desperately trying to overcome the situation. Shortly after that, the situation changed dramatically when Bob learned about my educational background. The company had announced a policy emphasizing diversity and actively began hiring people with disabilities and foreigners. The management discussed it in meetings and significantly increased hiring quotas to aim for a workplace where diverse people could work. Under the CEO's policy that it's important to prioritize personality and ability, not educational background, hiring doubled compared to previous years. This resolved the labor shortage and dramatically improved operational efficiency. Although no new hires came to the General Affairs Department, it was very pleasing that the range of hiring had expanded. It's wonderful that even if you're not confident in your educational background, there's more chance of being hired for other abilities. As I was talking about this with my subordinates, Bob interrupted with a frown. "Humph, you guys don't understand anything." Huh? Both my subordinates and I were surprised by Bob's words. Not caring about educational background means an increase in incompetent people. I wonder what management is thinking, spending personnel costs on useless human resources. Apparently, Bob didn't like the new hiring criteria. Since the increase in staff, he had been grumbling complaints, and the atmosphere in the General Affairs Department was tense. While feeling inwardly indignant at Bob's words, I answered calmly, "Our hiring criteria have never been just about educational background. If it were as you say, Mr. Bob, I wouldn't be here." When I said this, Bob's expression changed, and he glared at me sharply. What do you mean? I even don't have a high school diploma, but I've never once been criticized for my educational background in a job interview." As I quietly revealed this, Bob showed a surprised face for a moment, then covered his mouth with his hand. "Kevin, is it true that you haven't attended high school?" "Yes. Actually, in junior high school, I was a troublemaker and hardly went to school. After graduating, I was working part-time at an acquaintance's place. But my parents told me to get a stable job or go to school, so I chose to work. However, no company would hire me without an education, and I keenly felt the importance of schooling. So, while working part-time, I started self-studying, determined to increase my strengths. Thanks to my efforts, around age 23, I received a job offer as an employee at a beverage company and successfully joined. In the interview, I honestly discussed my educational background and highlighted my strengths. The interviewer even evaluated me as a man with guts. I felt inferior about my educational background, but I learned there are companies that will evaluate you if you appeal to other aspects of yourself. That's why I was happy to hear that the range of hiring had expanded. I said this to my subordinates. They nodded as if impressed. However, Bob, standing in front of us, couldn't hold back his laughter and was shaking his shoulders. How did you become a manager with your educational background? Don't you feel unqualified to be the boss of those college graduate subordinate? Bob continued, turning to the subordinates. What do you all think? Hearing that your boss is a low-educated idiot. The subordinates looked at each other with confused expressions, but eventually, one of them spoke up. Manager Kevin has always treated us sincerely and honestly. We have no complaints whatsoever. The other subordinates agreed with these words. Not getting the response he expected, Bob left the scene with a sulky face. What's this? No fun at all. Everyone's playing goody two-shoes. He grumbled that as he left, glancing at me one last time. From then on, Bob started summoning me by calling me dropout. Hey dropout, come here. Bob would casually say such things in the office without regard for others around. Employees who didn't know the situation looked at us curiously. Shame spread through my heart, and it was unbearable. Please call me by my name. No matter how many times I asked, Bob coldly retorted. Don't defy your department head. Those words repeated in my head over and over, weighing heavily on my chest. Can you hear me, dropout? As I was lost in thought, Bob's angry voice reached my ears again. I hurriedly stood up and rushed over to Bob. I'm sorry. Bob furrowed his brow, looking visibly displeased. I felt anxious inside, wondering what he would order me to do today. What he handed me was a single document. What's this? It's the outline of our previous meeting. Use this to prepare my business negotiation materials. It was an important document with the meeting's overview. It contained information that shouldn't be known to anyone but those in charge, so I hurriedly tried to return it to Bob. Lowering my voice so other employees couldn't hear, I said, shouldn't you be handling such important documents, Mr. Bob? However, Bob wouldn't take it back. I'm busy. I'm in charge of the project, but I'm ordering you to prepare the docs. But, as I hesitated, Bob said, I make the rules here. If you defy me, it's a $20,000 fine. He imposed his unreasonable rule, silencing my opinion. See you. Get it done ASAP. Bob smiled slightly, patted my shoulder, and left the department. To finish by the deadline, I had no choice but to create the document after finishing my own work. This forced me into excessive labor, working overtime for days. However, since I was asked to do it, I couldn't cut corners. I checked it many times to make the best negotiation materials possible and submitted it on the day of the meeting. Mr. Bob, here are the negotiation materials you asked for earlier. Please check them. I approached Bob's desk with the materials. Bob took the materials and flipped through the pages. How is it? I've considered readability while thoroughly covering the overview. The negotiation was about to start, so we needed to make copies for everyone and share them immediately. It all depended on Bob's okay now. You don't even have a high school diploma, do you? I don't need papers from an uneducated person. Bob carelessly threw the materials onto his desk. That stuff isn't worth reading. Even though I worked overtime to prepare it for him, he says it's not worth reading because I, an uneducated dropout, made it. All my efforts were wasted, and I got angry. You'll regret this, you know. I picked up the materials and looked them over once more. Are you sure you don't need this for the meeting? Is it okay to dispose of it? When I double-checked, Bob answered while yawning. Yeah, the client said they don't need it. Just throw it away already. Wasn't everything I did completely useless? I headed towards the trash can, suppressing my anger. An hour later, the business meeting started, and Bob left his seat. Just as I was about to return to my regular duties, I heard the sound of a door being forcefully opened in the distance. Bob returned to the department, his face pale. He hurried over with frantic footsteps, grabbed both my shoulders, and shook me violently. "Hey Kevin, do you still have it?" Oh, I was momentarily stunned, not understanding the situation at all. "Calm down, please. What are you talking about?" "The materials I asked you for. Bring them here right now." I frowned at Bob's words. "What are you saying? You ordered me to throw them away, so they are gone now." "What did you say?" Bob's face turned blue, and he started holding his head. "Make them again right now. This is an order." I don't understand what you're saying. Didn't you say you didn't need materials made by a dropout like me? He told me to throw them away, and now he's ordering me to remake them. I couldn't keep up with Bob's actions. "I can't. I have other work to do now. The business meeting is more important than that. Just hurry up and make them." Other employees were looking on curiously at Bob's panic. Then, an auditor who was about to attend the meeting came from the entrance. "Bob, have you prepared the materials? Let's start soon. I have another appointment." But weren't the materials no longer needed? To my question, he opened his eyes wide and immediately answered, "We don't need a hard copy. What I asked Bob for was the data files." The data. What the client needed was the data files that could be shared on devices. However, apparently Bob misunderstood and assumed that a hard copy isn't necessary meant something else. "So, you said I'll prepare them right away and left the meeting room. What happened?" He gave Bob a stern look. "Welcome." Bob stammered, unable to answer. He kept glancing at me discreetly, but said nothing. So I decided to answer instead. I disposed of the materials as ordered by department head Bob. The client's eyes gleamed sharply, glaring at Bob. "Hey Kevin, what are you saying? I didn't tell you anything." Bob smiled at me nervously, trying to cover up. I decided to explain in detail so the client could understand the situation. Actually, Bob had ordered me to prepare business negotiation materials for him. "What? Bob, did you leak the meeting contents to your subordinate?" Bob shook his head as he was confronted. It's no wonder the auditor was angry. Leaking negotiation details externally is a serious issue that could affect the company's survival. Bob must have realized the materials were needed after all and rushed back to me in a panic. The auditor severely reprimanded Bob for neglecting his duties. "I'm sorry. I heard from someone else that the materials weren't needed, so I thought there was no need to make them. What we need is the data. Moreover, it's out of the question to have your subordinate make it. How irresponsible are you?" Bob looked dejected, but when he saw my face, he gave an eerie smile. However, it was Kevin's decision to throw away the documents, carelessly discarding confidential company information. Isn't this man the real problem here? Unbelievably, he was trying to push his responsibility onto me, but such excuses didn't work on the auditor. It's your decision to delegate your responsibility to your subordinate. Now, blaming your subordinate, how unseemly. Bob thought he'd escaped smoothly, but he only angered the auditor further. There's no use pressing Bob now. It's a waste of time. The negotiation has already started. We must prepare the negotiation materials no matter what. At this moment, I thought of a chance to get back at Bob. "Please wait. You need the data, right? I can handle it, sir. Just give me a moment, please." But didn't you just say you threw it away yourself?" The auditor and Bob looked at me with shocked expressions. "I've shredded the hard copy, but I've saved the data. I'll send it to your device so everyone else can access it, sir." I immediately opened a file on my computer and sent the saved data to the auditor. After the auditor confirmed he received data, he began operating his device efficiently. I've shared it with all the attendees of the negotiation. We can now continue with the negotiation. "Thank you, Kevin. I'll properly thank you later. I'm honored to be of help." Accepting his gratitude sincerely, he headed to the meeting room with Bob. As they left, Bob glared at me resentfully, but I saw them off with a full smile. It would probably be a hellish negotiation for him. I was thinking, serves you right in my mind. 2 hours later, Bob returned with an exhausted expression and collapsed into his chair. Did the negotiation go well? In contrast to the completely worn-out Bob, I asked cheerfully. Perhaps scolded harshly by the auditors, Bob didn't even have the energy to yell, just glaring at me angrily. Because of you, I was scolded not only by the auditor but also by the CEO. But that's your responsibility, isn't it? I'd be troubled if you tried to push the responsibility onto me. What did you say? Just as Bob was about to grab me, the auditor and the CEO appeared. Not expecting the CEO to come, not just Bob and I, but all the employees present immediately stood up. The CEO said, "Hi everyone. Please ignore my presence here," and encouraged everyone to get back to their duties. Then, he approached me and shook my hand vigorously. "Well, your materials were excellent. They were well received by the client too, thank you. It was wonderfully done." Apparently, this client was an acquaintance of the CEO, so he had attended. Praised directly by the CEO. The auditor also smiled and commended me. "Thank you very much. I'm honored to have been of help to everyone." Although it was work pushed onto me by Bob, I was glad I had given it my all. As I was savoring the joy, Bob interrupted. "I'm the one who entrusted the materials to Kevin. Shouldn't I receive some evaluation too?" Despite being harshly scolded by the auditors, his attitude of seeking evaluation made the auditor and CEO frown. Still, Bob began to make excuses. "The reason I assigned the work to Kevin in the first place is because I have expectations for him." Expectations. Bob nodded strongly and continued talking. "Compared to me and my brilliant educational level, Kevin has nothing. Despite his low educational background, he doesn't even have a high school diploma. I still have high expectations for his future. I believe gaining diverse experiences is crucial for his growth, and that's why I strive to be a supportive supervisor." Watching Bob continue his excuses, I turned my eyes to the CEO. The CEO was quietly but sternly glaring at Bob. "So, you're saying you give chances to those with low educational levels? Of course, dropouts are losers, so it would be pitiful if they didn't get chances. Can you say the same thing to the CEO?" Bob stared at me with a surprised face. "Don't you know about the CEO's father's background? I mean, the former CEO." "Huh? The former CEO's background?" I answered Bob's question. "The company's founder, the former CEO, spent his time working part-time jobs after graduating from middle school. As an adult, he started a store trading in juice bottles and similar products, which eventually grew into our current company. The company saw significant growth in the post-World War II era, thanks to the former CEO's business acumen. From his student days, the former CEO had always said, 'Give working chances to those struggling in the academic background-focused society.' That's why his son, the current CEO, has expanded hiring criteria and aimed for a way of working not bound by academic background." So, Bob's statement was essentially insulting the former CEO for having a low educational level. Realizing this fact, Bob's face turned pale and he started trembling. I didn't mean to speak ill of the former CEO. As Bob explained in a shaky voice, the CEO continued to glare at him sternly, throwing important meeting materials to a subordinate. And now this slip of the tongue. "We need to discuss Bob's competence and suitability as a department head." The CEO nodded deeply at the auditor's words. This meant they would discuss whether Bob was suitable as a department head. Sensing this intention, Bob cried, "Please wait," and apologized. "It wasn't my true intention. Please have mercy." The CEO and others looked at each other, perplexed by Bob's desperate plea. Then, the CEO's eyes stopped on the rules posted on the General Affairs Department's wall. Those were the strict rules Bob had forced on his subordinates. "What on earth is this?" When the CEO asked, Bob stammered an answer. "These are rules to maintain discipline in the General Affairs Department. No, these are all for the department head's self-satisfaction." Thinking this was a chance to talk back to Bob, I immediately spoke up. "Fining people for breaking rules is too tyrannical and dictatorial. This goes against company policy." The employees who had been quietly watching gathered all at once and started exposing Bob's misdeeds. Though surprised by this situation, the CEO and others listened to our desperate appeals. "Hey, it's rude to crowd around the CEO like this. Get back to your posts." The panicked Bob ordered us, but was silenced by the CEO saying, "Be quiet." After hearing everything, the CEO and others left with Bob. "Please forgive me. I only made the rules to maintain order in the General Affairs Department, no, the company." The CEO would likely see Bob's actions as harassment and severely reprimand him. This is the end of his tyranny. As they left the department, the auditor told us, "Continue to focus on your work." We who had gotten back at Bob cheered and returned to work. The next day, Bob was demoted for neglect of duty, harassment of subordinates, and information leaks. I was surprised that his disciplinary sanction had been implemented much faster than I had anticipated, but it showed how seriously the CEO took the situation and responded swiftly. Due to repeated blunders, Bob lost the trust of all employees. His evaluation from superiors dropped, and it was rumored he'd been taken off the promotion track. After completing his suspension period, Bob was demoted from department head to a non-managerial position. First, the day after his demotion was decided, an official notice was posted on a company bulletin board. It clearly stated Department Head Bob demoted to non-managerial level employee. From that moment, Bob lost all his previous privileges. He lost his privilege of an executive office and parking space, and was relocated to a corner on the same floor as non-managerial employees. And I was appointed as the new department head. After discussing who should be the successor, I was chosen based on the quality of the negotiation materials and my work as a manager. As department head, my responsibilities increased, but so did my job satisfaction and income. I decided to create a comfortable working environment for employees. Following the CEO's example, Bob returned to the now quiet General Affairs Department with an awkward expression. From today, his seat is the same as rank-and-file employees. His previous arrogant attitude was gone, and he sat down looking small. "Good morning, Mr. Bob." When I greeted him, he visibly flinched. Avoiding eye contact, he muttered something and turned away. "I think ignoring your superior's greeting is inappropriate. Please respond properly." Unable to bear the stares of the surrounding employees, Bob reluctantly answered, "Good morning." I nodded with satisfaction, and Bob opened his computer with a small click of his tongue. "I have something to say before we start work." "What is it?" Bob looked at me nervously. I smiled at him and replied, "We haven't heard an apology from you yet. Please apologize for the harassment." This man had been punished accordingly, but we still hadn't received an apology. I wanted him to apologize to us to bring closure, but he argued back, "I'm not the department head anymore, so that should be enough. There's no need to apologize." The employee's eyes hardened at Bob's attitude, and the atmosphere became tense. "Don't you feel bad about what you did to us?" "I think I might have gone a bit too far, but I did it to maintain order in the General Affairs Department. I'm not wrong," Bob answered, half in desperation. Seeing no sign of remorse, I was disappointed. "Well then, this is a department head order. Apologize to everyone." "What?" Bob's eyes widened at my words. "I really wanted you to apologize on your own, but since I don't see any reflection, we have no choice." "No, it's not necessary." Even when ordered, Bob refused to apologize. His pride probably wouldn't allow him to admit his mistakes. However, clinging to academic background only hinders growth. "Mr. Bob, please look at that." In that direction was the rule board Bob had previously presented. "Let's have the person who made the rules confirm them one last time before taking them down. Absolute obedience to the department head's orders, right? Let's follow the rules you set yourself." With everyone's eyes on him, Bob was visibly shaken, sweating. "I'm not the department head anymore. That's invalid now. I refuse." "You refuse? Then we'll apply the 100 push-ups for saying no rule too, right?" I said nothing more and just stared at Bob. "If you can't even follow your own rules, you can't stay in this department." Bob couldn't argue back. Thinking he'd be forgiven if he followed the rules, he apologized to the employees. "I'm sorry, but that alone wasn't enough to forgive him. Now do the push-ups too." "Ah, damn it. Fine, I'll do it if I have to." Bob, in frustration, started doing push-ups right there. However, it seemed too strenuous for his middle-aged body, and he was out of breath after just 20. "Come on, 80 more to go." "You mean I still have to do more?" Realizing I was serious, Bob desperately completed 100 push-ups over half a day. By the end, he had no strength to stand up and collapsed on the floor with no one helping him. After that, Bob continued to work in the General Affairs Department as a rank-and-file employee. However, after his demotion, the atmosphere in the department changed completely. Employees gave him cold looks when talking about him and exposed his past misdeeds one after another. Even in meetings, his opinions were either ignored or not taken seriously. One day, during a planning meeting for a company event, the moment Bob tried to express his opinion, a young employee interrupted. "Mr. Bob, I heard that idea failed before. Is it really effective?" The meeting room fell silent, and other employees looked at Bob with cold eyes. Bob's face turned red, and he fell silent. Moreover, due to Bob's past actions, he was increasingly left out of important projects. Having completely lost the trust of his subordinates, he had to continue working in isolation. Whenever a project was delayed, Bob was always the one blamed. On the day Bob decided to resign, unable to bear it anymore, he said this: "This isn't the place for someone with high education like me to shine." Unable to endure the cold stares of employees and numerous failures, Bob resigned. "There's a more suitable place for me." Leaving those words behind, he left the company. However, that was just the beginning of his hardships. Bob started his own business but struggled with financing and couldn't progress as he had hoped. His excessive pride got in the way, preventing him from building connections, and he gradually became isolated, with no one to turn to for help. His business ended in failure. Pursued by debts, Bob had no choice but to take a low-paying part-time job. Spending days that made his past glory seem like a lie, he regretted every day. If he hadn't clung to academic background and set unreasonable rules, he might have been able to stay at the company. Bob had lost his chance due to his own actions. On the other hand, now the department head, was living fulfilling days while busy with guiding subordinates and work. Even in stressful jobs, sincere effort leads to fair evaluation, and subordinates grow by watching my example. The tense atmosphere in the General Affairs Department disappeared, and peace was restored. I intend to continue giving my all for the company and employees from now on.